So Odili, thanks for meeting with me. Can you tell me where you're from?
I was born in Nigeria, in Enugu, Nigeria, and my family left Nigeria just before the start of the Biafran War. So basically, I grew up after that situation in the United States.
Okay, great. Thanks. Tell us about how you started making art.
It was a long time coming, I guess, in the sense that I've been doing it since making drawings and what I would call art, or thinking about it in that way, since I was probably 5 years old, just drawing from things I found around the house and copied. Drawing was always really important to me, but I didn't see it as my probably a calling for myself until I was in my early teens, probably wanting to be a comic book artist. Yeah.
Great. How does research inform your artistic practice?
My current artistic practice is highly motivated by research of all kinds, whether it's looking at other artists for a certain kind of inspiration, or at least a sense of the frames of which I can work through, and then challenging those frames afterwards. Or if I'm dealing with some certain kind of thematic, social or cultural thematic, it involves research of all kinds, from speaking with people, interviewing, getting stories, reading suggested texts, this sort of thing. It's not been something I've actually. It wasn't really based in my practice while I was a student, other than basically looking at other artists, and that would be it. And but I see it now as something really important for me, the research part, which actually comes even to like looking at my own drawings I've done previously, related to certain subject matters, certain things, just to expand and build upon what I'm doing and what I'm wanting to do.
Okay. Tell us about your process. How do you approach your choices in regards to abstraction?
Um, Abstraction is a term. I think it identifies a certain kind of thinking a way through things to be able to get at the subject you want to get to. But I think about things in the real world, and so abstraction for me, on one level, doesn't seem to necessarily exist in a factual context, other than say a theoretical context, or something of that kind of nature. So when I'm dealing with work, I'm dealing with making work, I'm dealing with the problem or the concern I have in mind. And that's something that's grounded in the world. And it might be abstract in the sense of how does one talk about the complexity of anguish or something like this. So that's where abstraction for me gets to be a means of being able to be specific, even if there's something somewhat open about the start or about the approach. Um, but then I also understand that figurative artists will engage, say, the term anguish in that same manner through how they um, choose to depict or what references they use for the depiction. So in a certain sense, it's the same kind of thing. We just come to the problem with a different set of properties.
Okay. When did you make the shift towards public art? Was there a particular project that shifted your practice into presenting your work within public space?
Well, I think it's interesting to think about public art in the sense of that it's still an exhibition. The public is still a space of exhibition. I mean, we have the white cubes, and that's considered traditional and standard at this time. But you had, points. We had churches earlier than that. You had caves. So it's a matter of how you might think of public art as a means of, is it separate from the art experience or the art going experience, or does it just simply have a different function based on the nature of the space it occupies, or is it just simply different? And I'm learning to feel for myself it's not necessarily different, but it does have certain concerns that are, say, different than just a white cube that is essentially private owned business or something of that nature. versus the public, where the funds from the public go to manage that space. So when I'm making public work that's in the public, I'm thinking of how can I also bring in the role of the artist and the making of artwork into the public sphere, in as much as trying to speak to something that is of a general public or of a specific public.
Okay, well that's great, because that leads me to my next question. Why do you think public art is important at this point in time?
Well, definitely when we see what's happening with the protests across the globe and the challenge to monuments, one realizes, and it's really important, that these monuments in the world have an effect. They're not just benign things that are something you walk around to get to the grocery store. They are real things that represent real ideas that continue the cultural, societal mind through different generations. And this particular moment, the public is having a question. We want to re-examine those monuments and asking the question of, do those monuments carry our values now? And are these values that we want to give to our children tomorrow? And I think that that's really, really powerful situation that's happening now, where people are becoming involved in art in public in ways in which we haven't necessarily seen before.
Yeah, great. So then I guess segueing to the project here at Lawmeyer and the project at Jeske Sculpture Park in North County. Can you speak a little bit about some of the site-specific and/or idea-specific references you're making within the different color formations for the flags at each site?
Well, I was speaking with Bryce Robinson a bit about the history of Ferguson, which is home to Jeske Sculpture Park, and the neighboring town. Mm-hmm. And this is a really powerful story, essentially because there was, I mean, the history of Kinloch is that it was a thriving community at one point until with, local corruption, possibly ill-intentioned business enterprises and individuals, and racism, this town became landlocked and essentially suffocated from a type of survival. The tensions from that town, based on a chain link fence or the chain link fencing of this town, created exodus of a lot of the community members and white flight in the neighboring towns, Berkeley and Ferguson, and a general change of the environment where now Kinloch is seen as a dangerous space. And it's interesting to think about, when you think about this town, you drive into this town, Kinloch, you would think, what came from this place? But we have politicians, activists, and famous TV personalities that have come from Kinloch. Mm-hmm. And so we understand that Kinloch had the resources at a time to produce people like this at a national and international level. So it's to say that in the process, this town became a periphery, something that needed to be, was willfully being disappeared. And that problem extends and branched out into the neighboring towns and neighboring communities. So I'm looking and focusing on this notion of the chain link fence in 3 of the flags at Jeske, and the 4th flag is called Divide, is a action of 2 points, 2 shapes, seemingly wanting to touch but not being able to because of the division between them. And so this center flag is poignant for me in being able to speak about what happened in that periphery, leading to a cataclysmic moment in the shooting of Michael Brown, and then how we see everything else outside of that, which I would call the center space. And essentially, my project started out with wanting to. This is way before George Floyd, wanting to just deal with the information that's been collected, the dialogue that's been had for the last 5 years, and so after the incident, to see where we're at with this situation, and understanding the institutions of art as sanctuaries, safe places like sanctuary cities where people can gather to be safe, to be able to speak their minds and share their minds together. And this is how I see a museum. A museum is a place where you can put yourself at the highest of mind with others in a safe way and in a safe manner. So I wanted to be able to have the two parks connect this idea and theme of what's happened after Michael Brown, to be able to see where the discussion has gone from this point forward. And I was getting a sense of like, well, maybe we don't want to talk about this. Let's try to forget that this happened. That's the past. That's no longer in the present. That is until we have what we're having now with George Floyd, and how this protest has gone viral, like around the world, from London to through Western Europe to Africa to Latin America. Everywhere, people are just finally saying enough's enough. And so I think, in fact, this point of what happened in Ferguson can actually come back to be able to be readdressed and to say, what has actually happened? Have we addressed the situation in the community where we can go beyond this with hands together to make something better, so that we can prevent these kinds of things? And obviously not, but we are working on it together around the world together. So I think in a certain way, this project, wanting to focus on Michael Brown, was one thing, and wanting to work with arts institutions as sanctuary spaces to have safe discussion about this has become even more poignant.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, actually, I think you answered my next question, was just looking at the geographic and social relationship between our sites. Lawmeyer being in Sunset Hills in South St. Louis County, and then Geske being in Ferguson in North St. Louis County. And my next question was about the title, From Periphery to Center. But I think you answered that question.
Right.
Just kind of, unpacking that title a little bit.
Yeah, I think it was a title that I wanted to use because it really felt that way. Even visiting St. Louis, it just felt that way, that this is the idea of the periphery being a space that's from to the side, left to the side, not in focus, in a blur, a place that is not consequential to the focus. And being that St. Louis and Ferguson seem to have, even though they're connected in so many ways, that they seem to have a kind of a separate field of reality. I love the idea that we found a park, Geske Park, to work with us, because this seemed really symbolic for me to be able to connect these two similar type spaces together, and to be able to connect that neighborhood with greater St. Louis together, and then to have this conversation. And I think the beautiful point of it is that and this is a poetic thing. It's tragic what happened to George Floyd, but the ability to have a refocus and the attempt to try to reset the frame of mind after that incident is what has become almost like a miracle. And I truly mean it, because I would look at, I saw recently a video of Jon Stewart talking about, at that time, the fresh Eric Garner killing, and all it was jokes and kind of like, oh well, another person dead, what's next? No serious sense of deep reflection at that time from the audience of the comedy show, or the Comedy Central show, and essentially no real great change that came after that situation, as was the same thing with the Michael Brown killing. So we're at a point now where I think all people in America, not just Black people, not just brown people, but all people are having a sense of rethinking about what is going on and why is it going on and why is this brutality systemic, and that it's connecting to everybody because now everybody can see what it is like to possibly lose your own child to this kind of brutality and this kind of um, uh, basically lack of professionalism with people who are actually supposed to keep others safe.
Mm. Okay. Okay, so what do you hope visitors to both Lawmeyer and Jeske learn from the show? And how would you like for the installations to function as sites for discussion and discourse? I think you talked about that a little bit, but just kind of looking at, what our role might be.
I think it's really important just to be able to become nuanced in every way possible, nuanced about all we have around ourselves. That's the only way we're going to grow and learn. And that's what education is about. It's about becoming focused in details and as much as the big picture, at the same time being able to see how the problems extend beyond just this symptom of just a point or just an incident. So the show is not primarily about Michael Brown. It's about the discussion we can have after the effect of that situation, after the result of that situation, to see what we can do to make our community and our society better. And this is the question that is raised in the flag X that is at Lawmeyer. We have in that top to bottom a color wedge referring to life itself, in my opinion. Life is the world of color. And then in this other wedge, we have white with a thin blue line representing police force. It's the symbol for the police, but it's also maybe this kind of ultimatum between light and dark, between good and bad, good and evil, maybe, or between up and down or left and right. So it's in essence, the flag is a representation of a crossroad. But when we have the term X, I like that term because it means it could be anywhere, that we have responsibility as a group, as people, to be able to make that decision of where we go rather than where we're determined to be forever. It's like, no, we can decide as we look at things, as we think about things, as we discuss with each other, where we can go as a group.
I like that. Okay. By creating a metaphorical and physical dialogue through sculpture, how are you hoping to connect our two sites?
Excuse me, I didn't hear the last part.
How are you hoping to connect the two sites of Lawmeyer and Jeske? I think you've been kind of answering that question already.
No, that's fine. No, that's fine. I just really want to be able to have people recognize the history of where they're actually living. When I did my project at New Orleans for the Prospect 4, and I did a flag project there, my first flag project essentially, I was connecting different parts of the city and learning amazingly that lots of people don't travel to other parts of the same city they live in. They don't have a sense of history connection to other parts of the same city they're living in. And New Orleans is a place with history like rampant. And St. Louis is the same kind of city. It's an old city. It's a great city with amazing history. It's a very important city within the context of the United States of America. There are histories and stories that can be found and told everywhere within St. Louis, within the state of Missouri. So you have this notion of periphery, and one has to ask, is it actually periphery? If I can still see it, isn't it there?
Mm-hmm.
Versus that we keep it to the side. Why don't I look here to the left too? Why don't I look to the right? Why don't I look up and down? Why don't I take the time to be able to see what exists around me rather than only the immediate?
Okay, great. Okay, I think I have, let's see. Yeah, just two more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in thinking about some of our previous conversations at the beginning of us putting this project together, how can art be a catalyst for conversation regarding change? I think we talked about fairness as a reflection on place and distance, but you also talked about this idea of healing. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, healing in the sense of being able to say, using the space of art to create platforms of of compassion and of consideration. So it's to say that one may not agree on certain things, but one can try to come to understand what's on the other side. You know, you have art and you have art critics, and art critics sometimes are seen as judge and jury, but that's not necessarily the case. It's really an opinion based on the person's foundational sense of the world, and that's what it is. And then you have another critic who has another foundational sense of their world that can come in and say something different, completely different about the same object. And that's what's really beautiful. It's the interaction of what happens with art, that one could try to express an idea at the highest of mind, and that you have an audience that then tries to interpret and read at the highest of their mind.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'm really happy with how this project turned out in the end. I feel like possibly there's a sixth sense in wanting to do something that I wanted to do here and wanting to bring this together. If we would have had the exhibition when we wanted to have it, who knows if this would not have been an underscoring catalyst to make this project even that much more clearer to the world. But it's to know that art has something at its heart that becomes part of things that are even bigger, that are rather as big as the idea of community and people and society itself. That art has those ideas that are underscoring what connects society, so that when you have one thing and then you have another, good art can really become part of this other dialogue. And I think that that's what is really refreshing to me, to see that art has vitality, art has viability, even beyond its reasoned and thought out scope.
Great. That's perfectly put. Thank you so much, Odili.
Okay.
Great. Thanks.
You're welcome.